Can you spray paint without primer? Taking on a new paint job and wondering if you can spray paint without primer? The answer is yes, you can spray paint without primer. However, it is important to understand that if you're going to spray paint without primer, you need to thin your spray paint before applying it. In this blog post, we will discuss the importance of thinning your spray paint before spraying, and we will also provide some tips on how to do it correctly. By reading this blog post, you will learn everything you need to know about spraying paint without primer. You will understand the importance of thinning your paint before spraying, and you will also learn how to do it correctly. So what are you waiting for? Keep watching. Spray paint primer is an important part of the painting process, as it helps to prepare the surface for paint and improve the final appearance of the finished product. Primer acts as an aid to protect surfaces from damage and wear, making it an essential step in any paint job. There are a variety of paint spray primers available on the market, each designed for different types of surfaces and applications. For example, there are primers specifically designed for metal surfaces, which help to prevent rust and corrosion. There are also primers designed for use on plastic or glass surfaces, which help to improve the adhesion of paint and reduce the risk of chipping or peeling. No matter what type of surface you're working with, you can always apply a primer that can help you achieve a professional-looking finish. Can you spray paint without primer? Yes, you can spray paint without primer if the surface is in good condition and has a clean, smooth finish. Primer is a type of paint that is used to create a better surface for the top coat of paint to adhere to. It's usually recommended to use primer when painting surfaces that are in poor condition, have a rough surface, or are made from a material that is not ideal for painting, like metal. However, if the surface you're painting is in good condition and has a clean, smooth finish, then you can probably get away with just spraying on the top coat of paint. Make sure to do a test patch before spraying the entire surface to make sure the paint will adhere properly. How to thin before spray painting process. Before beginning a spray painting project, it is important to thin the paint so that it will flow smoothly through the nozzle and produce an even coating. The amount of thinning required will vary depending on the type of paint being used, but there are a few general tips that can be followed. First, add the thinner to the paint gradually, starting with just a few drops and then increasing the amount as needed. Second, be sure to stir the paint thoroughly after adding the thinner. Otherwise, it will not be evenly distributed. Finally, test the consistency of the paint before beginning to spray and adjust as needed. By following these simple tips, you can ensure that your next spray painting project goes smoothly and produces professional-looking results. Can thinning replace primer? No, thinning cannot replace primer. Although both serve the purpose of preparing the surface for paint, they have different properties and functions. Thinning is a solvent that decreases the viscosity of the paint, making it easier to apply. It also helps to prevent brush marks and roller stipple. Primer, on the other hand, is a sealer that helps to improve the adhesion of paint to the surface. In addition, it helps to fill in porous surfaces and provides a more even base for paint application. For these reasons, primer is an essential step in any painting project, and it cannot be replaced by thinning. What happens if you spray paint without primer? Spraying paint without a primer can have a few different consequences, depending on the type of paint and surface you're painting. With most latex paints, failing to use a primer will result in poor coverage and adhesion, and the paint is more likely to peel off or chip over time. On metal surfaces, the paint will also tend to flake off more easily without a primer. With oil-based paints, not using a primer can cause yellowing or staining of the final coat. In general, it's always best to use a primer when painting any surface to ensure the best possible results. People often think that they need to use a primer before spraying paint, but this is not always the case. Primer is an important step in painting, but it's not always necessary. In fact, for some projects, you can actually skip the primer and go right to the paint. Here are some of the most frequently asked questions people ask about using spray paint without primer. Is Rust-Oleum spray paint effective? Rust-Oleum spray paint is effective in that it is durable and long-lasting paint. It is available in a variety of colors, and it dries quickly to form a tough finish. However, it is important to note that Rust-Oleum spray paint should not be used on surfaces that will come into contact with food. Also, be sure to follow the manufacturer's instructions for proper application. Can I use a primer with chalk paint? There are a few things to consider when deciding whether or not to use a primer with chalk paint. The first is the consistency of the paint. If the paint is too thin, it may not adhere well to the surface you're painting, and a primer can help with that. The second thing to consider is the porosity of the surface you're painting. Chalk paint tends to absorb into porous surfaces more readily than non-porous surfaces. So if you're painting something like stone or brick, you may want to consider using a primer. The last thing to think about is the color of the paint. If you're painting something white or light colored, using a primer can help prevent yellowing or streaking over time. Another question asked is, how can I choose the best spray paint primer? When choosing a spray primer, it's important to consider the surface you're working with. Some primers are better for metal surfaces, while others are designed for use on plastic or wood. Ensure the primer is compatible with the paint you're using as well. A good rule of thumb is to choose a primer that's one shade lighter than the paint you plan to use. This will help ensure your finished project has a smooth surface and even finish. All in all, it is possible to spray paint without primer. However, the results may not be as good as if you were to use a primer. Primer helps the paint stick better to the surface and can also help with hiding any blemishes or imperfections on the surface. If you are looking for the best results, we recommend using a primer before spraying your paint. Thanks for watching, and remember, paint safe.